Yeah, so I'm Farah Khan. Hey everyone. I work in the digital recruitment team. I'm a digital recruitment campaign manager in DfE, and I'm here today because I'm passionate about challenging the stigma against racism and discrimination.
Lovely stuff. Thanks, Farah. My name is Katie. It's lovely to meet you all. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm the digital recruitment lead here at DfE Digital, which means that I run the recruitment team that are recruiting all of our wonderful specialists into DfE. I'm incredibly passionate about being an active ally, about being completely and fully anti-racist, and I'm also a mental health first aid instructor, which means that I'm incredibly passionate about ensuring everybody's well-being and mental health is in a good place. As we've mentioned, we work for DfE Digital, which is part of Department for Education. We, as Department for Education, employ about 6,000 people, and our main goals are to create a world-class education and social care system for children, adults, and the most vulnerable people throughout society. Farah and I are a little bit, what's the word, Farah? How do you use it? We're a little bit chatty, we're quite extroverted, and we thought rather than us just talking at you for 1 hour, we'd ask you to join in so you can either come off of mute or you can write in the chat box. And we're going to go through something that we like to call a scale of greatness. You're probably sitting there thinking, what on earth are these two doing? Why is there a picture of lots of food on my screen? But we like to do this whenever we present and whenever we have group meetings, just to check in on how people are feeling, check in on energy levels and just see where people are at today. So what I'm going to do is go through each of these pictures. I'm going to describe what the picture is, and I want you to tell us what picture are you feeling? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So again, you can come off of mute or you can write it in the chat box. So are you feeling number 1? A little bit like you've been dropped on the floor. It's Thursday, it's nearly Friday, you feel a little bit sabotaged, maybe a little bit bitter, and you just want the weekend to come. So that's number 1. Are you number 2? You're warm, you're cozy, you're safe, you're in your pod. You're not particularly fussed about coming out of your pod. It's been snowing. Yesterday in Aberdeen, it got to minus 20 degrees overnight. So if anyone's from Scotland here, I imagine you're in that box there. So number 2 is being nice, safe and secure and in your pod. Are you number 3? Number 3 could be anywhere from the left-hand side to the right or the other way around. So are you a bit of a bruised banana? Are you feeling a little bit delicate but still full of goodness? Are you a ripe banana? Are you feeling good, ready to give us some vitamins and some really good answers? Are you number 4? You're a chili. You're feeling hot, hot, hot. You're feeling ready to engage, ready to learn, and ready to talk with us and share your thoughts and ideas around anti-racism. Or are you number 5? Are you just feeling absolutely fabulous? You're feeling absolutely wonderful, top of the world. You're excited to be here and excited to learn. So, how are people feeling? Write in the chat box for us or come off mute. Are you 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5?
I feel like all of them are at different hours throughout the day. when I'm homeschooling, I'm definitely number 1. But when it comes to like motivation and doing my own business, then I'm definitely 4 and 5.
Yes.
Yeah, but I am liking being in my pod. Yeah, and I'm a bit of 3 as well, you know. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you so much, Nicola. I love that. You be whatever you want to be. And apparently all of them. Absolutely love that. So let's have a look in the chat. So, oh no, somebody is feeling like a number 1, like they've been dropped on the floor. We're here for you. Protect your energy. We've got quite a few 3s feeling slightly bruised. It's nearly Friday, isn't it? Some of 2 and some of 3, and a lot more 3s as well. Okay, good stuff. Well, thank you so much for indulging us. Okay, we've got a 5. Feeling great, feeling fab. It's the last day of the week. Great stuff. Okay, we just do that to check on people's energy levels, to get you talking with us, because we really want to make sure this is an interactive session.
The next slide, thank you. So we want to start off by saying that we are on a journey. We're learning, we're making mistakes, we're talking, we're listening, and we're also changing our mindset about and our approach every single day. We wanted to run this session because we recognize there might be some people who don't know how to start a conversation about anti-racism in their organization. So we're going to talk to you through some of the small and effective tools and changes we've put into place to start our own journey of being an anti-racist organisation. So in order to have this conversation, we need to create a safe space for learning. Therefore, we're going to set some ground rules. So in the question box, or if you feel like shouting out, what do you need from us and your fellow participants to get the most out of this session? Anyone wants to come off mute or put in the box? Let's have a look if we've got any answers. Can't seem to see anything. Anybody got any kind of answers? No? Okay, so we'll start off by saying that we ask you to respect each other's opinions and get their level of understanding. Everyone is at a different point in their learning, and this is not a space for judgment. So please don't go on your emails or check your Slack or emails or Teams messages. You can use a chat box or audio to engage with us. Be mindful, racism and discrimination is an incredibly important and difficult subject for some of us to talk about. So please look after your own personal safety. Also, confidentiality. If someone shares an experience, please don't repeat it outside this room unless they give you explicit consent to do so.
Great, okay then. Well, when we were thinking about how to run this workshop, we were thinking, gosh, there's so many things that we could cover. There's so many different things that we can do to sort of help people start conversations. But actually we thought, let's focus on 3 main things that we've implemented to make sure that we are creating an anti-racist culture at DfE Digital. So we're going to split the day into 3. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how we actually got to start the conversation about being anti-racist and racism within the workplace. We're then going to move on to talk about what we've been doing as recruitment specialists to make sure that all panel members who are interviewing candidates are trained on how to be anti-racist and how to be inclusive in their interview practices. We're then going to move on to talk about accountability. So those of you who are on the call, I imagine you're here because you care about being anti-racist, because you want to help eradicate racism, whether that be structural or institutional racism within your workplace. You'll often know that sometimes racism, race, anything really that falls under the D&I umbrella gets pushed to the background and other priorities move up. So we're going to talk about how we're actually holding ourselves accountable and how we're not going to stop pushing for being an anti-racist organisation. So our first talking point is really around how we started the conversation about being anti-racist. And in order for us to do this, we need to understand what you all as participants understand by the word or the phrase being anti-racist or anti-racism. So could you either come off of mute or write in the chat box and tell us what your understanding of anti-racism is?
For me, it's calling out racism when you hear it or see it.
Absolutely, that really actively calling out racism. Any other thoughts? And it's also okay if you don't have to admit it, but if you're sitting and thinking, I don't know, and that's why I'm here. That's also fun. As Farah said, we're all completely on a journey together.
I think it's, sorry, hello everyone, I'm Saria from Good Things Foundation. I think it's also about recognising individual journeys and people's experiences and knowing that you may not always understand or relate, but, you know, to respect them as an individual.
You're absolutely right. Thank you so much for your really valuable contribution there. And as we move on in a few slides' time, Farah's actually going to talk about how that really came out of a talking point and somewhere like an area of focus for us as we were running some of these things we're going to be speaking about. So thank you both very much. If you were to simply just Google or type into your phone, what is anti-racism? The definition would probably sound something like, anti-racism refers to a form of action against racial hatred, bias, systemic racism, and the oppression of marginalised groups. Anti-racism is usually structured around conscious efforts and deliberate actions to provide equitable opportunities for all people on an individual and systemic level. So that's exactly what you just said, isn't it? That individual and systemic level. Quite simply, I just want to pull out 2 of the words here. So one of those is conscious, those conscious efforts, really having it in your forefront. I'm sure lots of people are saying the past few years, or particularly the past year, oh, well, I've read this book. Great, you've read a book and it's a really amazing place to start, but then what are you doing? What's your learning you're taking away from reading that book? And the second word I wanted to pull out there was deliberate. What are your friends, community, your family, your organization doing to deliberately tackle racism in whatever form that it appears? So after years of work and contribution from different colleagues across DfE, in 2018, we actually recruited a team, and they're called Project Race. Project Race is a team filled with really incredible colleagues, and their sole focus is eradicating institutional racism within DfE. So just dedicating that time, dedicating that resource, making sure there are people holding everybody accountable. This was a really big step in our journey towards becoming an anti-racist organisation and changing the mindsets, not only of the people within DfE, but also across the government as well. For those of you who work in the diversity, equity and inclusion space, potentially the racism space as well, you might have noticed just last week we actually had an advert live and we're recruiting for our head of Project Race again. So if anyone did apply, I wish you all of the luck in the world. One of the first things Project Race did was actually look at our people survey results. So when I say people survey, that's simply the survey that checks on how colleagues are doing, not just in DfE, but everyone in government fills it out, and your organisations are very likely to have those as well. Project Race then created a separate survey called the Project Race Survey, which really delved into people's understanding and experiences in the workplace around racism, but also around things like how likely they are to be rewarded and to recognised for their works, how much they want to stay or leave the organisation. Project Race then analysed the results from those two surveys and broke them down by ethnicity so they could really help us look at where we could improve the experience for our Black, Asian and minority ethnic colleagues. From that, we then had recommendations. So basically like a slide or just a few recommendations that we could really focus our efforts on. And for us, that was so important that we were focusing our first initial efforts on fact, on real lived experience, not just making assumptions. Farah, do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Using data whereby you actually have something to work by rather than, like Katie said, going by assumptions, because it is easy to do so.
Absolutely. As part of this journey, we've spent a lot of time listening, exploring, having both comfortable and uncomfortable conversations in order to actually plan the doing, plan that activity. We recognise that people often stayed silent, not because they were pro-racism, because they simply didn't have the language or the tools to talk openly and raise concerns about race and particular racial discrimination. One thing we recognise is that we in DfE Digital are a team of a few hundred people. Our organisation has got 6,000 people. So again, looking at the really small level to start off with, what are we going to do locally within our directorate to get people to speak and to listen to our colleagues who are impacted by racism on a daily basis? And this is when we decided that we had to hold an away day purely focused on race and racial discrimination.
So at first, we had to think about how an away day focused on race would work. So we got together a group of volunteers from different teams throughout the directorate. Some of the things we included in the away day were group learning, breakout room learning, where people felt safe. Also, facilitators were present to answer any questions. We had quizzes, guest speakers talking about Race 101 sessions. We had run a survey asking our colleagues what topics to cover. The results from the survey showed us that people wanted a safe space to learn about race and racism and how to be an ally. People wanted the away day specifically focused on the experience of Black lives, including learning about excellent Black people throughout history. If we were ever unsure about the away day or how the sessions would go, we'd ask ourselves, why should racial discrimination go ignored, and why are we doing this? We needed to be mindful about our approach, but we were going to recognise the need for open and honest conversations, specifically focused on race and the Black lives experience. This started with colleagues sharing their live experiences, colleagues sharing that they were angry, sad, confused, and felt restricted on what they could actually do. We didn't want our Black colleagues to relive their painful experiences, so needing to be sensitive and ensure a diverse group of people were involved and that the burden was taken away from our Black colleagues and it wasn't solely on them. The session that got most feedback was a passage written by a Black person and it was delivered by a white person. Our colleagues actually asked for this, where they went out to their friends, their family, external to government, to ask them of their lived experiences. For the colleagues on the away day to read out. We had 9 in total, and we're currently on our 3rd away day. So just to show you the power of listening, the power of understanding, I'm going to read you this passage. Just also to mention, any names mentioned in this passage has been changed for confidentiality purposes. However, this person did give us their consent to share this passage with you. It's that sinking feeling again, the same one I have every morning as I get out of bed and start the morning routine. I am far lost in my dark thoughts again as I get the children ready for school. I barely notice my husband anymore when he kisses me goodbye and ushers the children out of the door for school run. As I get ready to go out, my neighbour shouts, "Good morning." It may be morning, I think to myself, but it certainly isn't good, at least not for me anyway. The usual emotions of dread and fear overwhelm me as I think about going to that place again, that dark prison others call work. Despite feeling emotionally exhausted, my brain does its best to summon the little energy I have left to brace myself for the day ahead. The same rollercoaster of underlying discrimination I pretty much go through every single day. It starts with my neighbouring white colleagues on our island of death, burying their heads into their laptops, pretending not to notice me as I arrive at work. A few minutes later, however, I hear choruses of hellos, how are yous, and excited chit-chat as my white colleagues subsequently arrive at work. The divisional manager follows shortly afterwards and barely listens to my response as he nonchalantly asks how I am, pretending he's interested in exchanging pleasantries with me, however, or how my evening was. On the very rare occasion my colleagues or divisional manager do talk to me, their comments are often riddled with microaggressive undertones. They seem to think comments like, "Oh, Grace, loving your afro today, reminds me of a sponge," or "People like you are often servants or cleaners where you come from, aren't they?" are light banter. The abuse doesn't end there. As I log into my laptop and open my emails, I know exactly what to expect. The usual undermining feedback from my line manager about my draft submissions or any piece of work that I deliver. "You need to emulate your high-performing colleagues, Grace, if you want to come out of your underperformance, and I'm trying to help you do that," my line manager says in his usual patronizing tone during our performance chat. Gone are the days when I spoke up about my performance or commented on his feedback. Any confidence I once had has been well and truly knocked by the defensive and aggressive label slapped on me for speaking up. The same label that is attached to my every attempt to escalate discrimination and bias to my senior leaders. So now I just stare blankly at my line manager during performance chats, lost again in my familiar dark place. He does all the talking and I just nod, like a lifeless robot with nothing left for me to fight or stand up for. I have given up looking to my Black colleagues for empathy or support as they face the same Groundhog Day of racial discrimination day in, day out. Like me, they operate like zombies, non-entities, doing the best they can to get through each day, hoping and praying that one day, just one day, there will be some form of escape from this hell. At the end of the day, every day, I lay in bed after work. My pillow is soaked with the same tears of loneliness, frustration, and anger. And when the tears run dry, I sigh in exasperation, close my eyes, and sink into yet another darkness, knowing tomorrow awaits to greet me with the same gloom, the same darkness, a darkness I did not choose, a darkness I cannot escape.
Okay, thank you so much for reading that, Farah. And we're just going to give people a few seconds just to absorb that extract that someone kindly wrote for us from outside the government. And I just think we have to really here take a second to think about the power of listening, not just listening and on being on your emails, but actively listening to someone's real lived experiences and beginning to understand we have to do something to make a difference. I do understand that may be a very upsetting piece to hear for some people, so please look after your personal safety as we go forward. Okay, so we're now going to move on to talk about the second part of our talk, which is around what training we've implemented. So we mentioned earlier on that Farah and I work in a digital recruitment team. So we sit in DfE Digital and we hire in all of the wonderful specialists who are creating apps, websites for teachers, social care, for children, for lots of different people. So we have a really unique position here to actually help to eradicate discrimination and racism within the recruitment process. So again, I want people to either come off mute or write in the chat box and tell us, where do you think racism or discrimination could or might happen in any recruitment process? Don't all go at once. I know you want to. You don't have to all go at once. Yeah, absolutely. So someone here has said when sorting applications, you're absolutely right. It might be that there's a little bit of affinity bias there. So someone's reading the application of someone who's really like them, therefore they're more likely to put it through. Absolutely, Nicola, you said the name of the CV, so the name of the applicants. What else have we got? Absolutely, Sophie, thank you so much for that. So again, we're looking at the name of the applications. Can you think of any other points where discrimination or racism may happen? Oh, interesting. Where the vacancies are actually advertised. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So where are these roles being promoted? Are they just going to the circles of friends that you know in your circle, and therefore you're more likely to hire someone who's more likely like yourself? Yeah, absolutely. We've got in here possibly the secondary school the person attended. Education is a huge part of bias. So even from, did the person go to school? Do they have GCSEs? Do they have A levels? Did the person go to university, or did they do an apprenticeship? Oh, great. And thank you so much, Sarah. You put in here location of where they live. Absolutely. So these are some really key ways that discrimination and racism can happen. And you're all interested in picking up on the sort of beginning part there. So from the advert to the application, how about from the application onwards? So from the application to when we interview delegates and when we interview candidates, where do you think discrimination or racism might happen there? Okay, so we've got it happens from the start with unconscious bias on names, education, experience. You're absolutely right. And I really like, Imran, what you picked up there, which is around experience. So what are we actually assessing? Like, what are we asking for? And then we've also got someone said tick boxes. So ethnicity tick boxes, for example, black, mixed race, etc. So yeah, by that, I'm assuming that you mean the normal diversity form that people would have to fill in, like a diversity declaration that most teams have. Okay, so what about after that process then? Oh, I love this, Sophie. Yeah, so you've come in and you've said cultural bias in interview questions. You're absolutely right. For anybody that's worked in recruitment, you will have heard the phrase, is this person a cultural fit? We do not hire, and you should not hire on cultural fit, because cultural fit is not a thing. It's a made up phrase. What is a cultural fit? If you're hiring on any fit, it should be a values fit. Do the person's values align with the values of your team, your department, your organizations? Do they have the same vision as you? Well, I'm going to stop there, but thanks so much for that really great engagement. I'm really keen that people have a good understanding of where discrimination can happen within the recruitment process. Oh, we've got here, so acknowledging English as a second language and articulating some things can be different. Absolutely. So with that, we can think about what are you doing with your interview questions? Are you saying them out loud and you put them in a chat box? Can you send them over before? Can you actually support and engage with your candidates? And actually, I want to pick up on one of the points that quite a few people made, which is around education, which is around name, around qualifications on CVs. So any application that's sent into us is completely name blind. And by that, we mean our panel members do not get to find out any personal details, including gender, ethnicity, name, education, about somebody until they're sitting in front of them. And then they'll just get their name, and the candidate can choose to tell them as and what they wish to do so. And the reason we do that is to just completely eradicate that form of bias with looking at names, looking at education. And us as a team as well, we're really passionate about taking qualifications out of the picture. There are so many routes into work, and there are so many routes into being a digital specialist. And by stipulating that someone has to have a degree, they have to have this A level, this qualification, it's really excluding a huge amount of people. So I'm really glad people picked up on that. So what we decided to do alongside making things name blind and the training that we do already is create something that we are calling bias and inclusive interview training, which is training that we are saying that every single panel member that works with us in our recruitment has to undertake once a year, alongside unconscious bias training and all the other training we have to do as civil servants. Now, we had to think about the size of our group. So right now there's about 20 of us on this call. There are going to be some ambiverts, some extroverts and introverts. And actually this group is much too large to run a real in-depth training session. So we've got our group sizes down to 6. People say that you can train intimately up to around 15 people, but because racial discrimination and discrimination within the recruitment processes, it's so difficult for people to talk about, we actually keep those group sizes down to 6. And those sessions are run by people like Farah and myself who see the recruitment process and see discrimination that's happened. The reason we have 6 is to make sure that everybody can contribute. There's not an option to come along to our training and not contribute. We really need to hear from absolutely everybody. And much like we did earlier on today, we create a really safe space. We create ground rules. It's not a space for judgment. It's a space for learning, for developing. So what do we actually cover in the training? Well, here are just some of the things that we cover. So how and when discrimination can happen. We go into all of the different types of discrimination, bias that can occur within the recruitment process, all the way from creating the advert. Your advert may be written in a really masculine tone, which most job descriptions are, funnily enough, all the way through to when you're actually offering the candidate and they ask for flexible working or part-time hours. So how and when that can occur, what it can look like, what it can sound like, and how to spot signs of it. Reasonable adjustments. So we've been interviewing remotely now. I think I heard yesterday we were on day 325 or 26 of lockdown right now. Sorry to bring that up and to make people sad. But we've been interviewing remotely now for nearly a year, and we've learned so many things about how we can actually support our candidates to be the best they can be remotely. There are loads of reasonable adjustments that you can put in place throughout the process, throughout the interview, but also when someone comes into the workplace to make sure they're supported. And one of the most important things that we do within our training is actually show our panel members how they can question bias. We give them real life examples from all over the world of things that have actually happened. And we say, right, what would you do in this situation? And again, we have that really small group size, so we can really get people to sort of to talk to us, to engage with us. So how do you question bias? What language would you use? How would you go about bringing it up to someone who's potentially on your panel but is more senior than you? So I'm going to hand over to Farah, and she's going to talk you through one of the case studies that we used in our training, and she's going to ask you what you would do in this situation.
Thank you, Katie. A Black male candidate interviews for a product manager vacancy. After the interview, the panel chair gives written feedback to say the candidate wouldn't fit in here. A white male scored slightly lower with similar skills and experience is hired instead. So just reading this passage, what is actually wrong here? What can you think of? What kind of shines out to you that, okay, this needs challenging? If you can just shout out or pop some answers in the chat box.
Really keen to hear potentially how people would challenge it. What language would you use?
And what language that this person is using, the panel chair, actually shines out to you. What is it? Because I can see a word here that makes me think, yeah,
let me go back a slide for you.
The word lower, he scored lower, but the white candidate was still hired, even though he scored lower. Why is that?
Yeah, exactly. And I think I love what you've done there. You've actually picked up on the pure facts of the matter, that the white candidate scored lower. So it's really, we mentioned earlier, one of the things we do is really lean on facts because you can't hide away from them. So you're absolutely right, pointing out this person scored lower. How can someone be hired above because of a cultural fit?
I can see there the candidate wouldn't fit stands out to me. So he says wouldn't fit, absolutely. That word wouldn't fit just completely just shows the bias towards the candidate. So yeah, thank you for that. That's really, really interesting and really great that you picked that out.
Yeah, one of the things that we always ensure to do in every meeting we have, whether it's a moderation meeting when we're looking at applications, whether it's in an interview moderation meeting when we're deciding who actually gets it, you'll have somebody from our recruitment team who's trained in all of these things there at every point to question bias, to challenge things. So if this ever came up in our workplace, my goodness, would we shut it down exactly before it even started? But not only that, we're there to support those panel members who potentially aren't as confident at raising things, or potentially there's someone who's more senior on the panel and they don't feel too comfortable to do it. So it's really important throughout your recruitment process to think about who's in the room, who has the authority in the room, and what are you doing to actually mitigate any bias that happens throughout your process? What are you actively doing? So I want to take us back to, what does being anti-racist actually mean? So what are you actively doing to eradicate discrimination throughout your recruitment processes? Great stuff. Okay, so we're going to move on now to talk a little bit about accountability. So if any of you on this call work in the space of inclusion and equity, you're likely to know that sometimes D&I, sometimes any form that fits under the Equalities Act 2010 can be a priority for a department, for your organisation, for a team, but sometimes it slips down that priority order when other things come up. So we had to make sure that we were holding ourselves accountable for our actions, accountable for actually actively being anti-racist. So we thought we'd talk about just some of the really simple things that we've implemented to actually make sure we are mandating ourselves and we are holding ourselves accountable. And this isn't just something that we can talk about at one session and then it goes away. So we're going to start by talking about something we've created called the Race Working Group, and I'm going to hand over to Farah for that.
Thank you. So yeah, the Race Working Group is a group of volunteers from different teams across the directorate. They get together and I'm involved as well, we get together every fortnight, whereby we strengthen the links that have already been made with Black and Black, Asian, minority ethnic colleagues across digital and tech. So we have an agenda that's set before the meeting and we have actions at the end. So we are holding ourselves accountable. It's really important to stress that it's not just a meeting that we have just once a month or once every 2 months. We have it every fortnight. So we have a look at what's going on at the moment. We have a look whether we need to discuss the Race Away Day, whether we need to implement a survey, whether we need to implement one-to-one sessions. And really, again, is that importance on listening to people and talking about it. So yeah, it's something that we've continuously been doing, and we hope that we could strengthen links even more throughout the year.
Absolutely. I think one of the bits I want to draw out there as well, Farah, is what you said about having that different mix of people within that working group, and in particular making sure that there are senior leaders there holding themselves accountable as well, because in the Race Working Group you have a selection of our senior leaders as well.
Yeah, that's right. So we've got senior leaders from different areas, different teams, and again, it's important not just having random people joining, but we need to have that senior kind of leadership as well, bringing their thoughts and ideas together and listening to other people's voices as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So the next thing on here is making really public promises. So we as DfE Digital have published 3 blog posts about what we are doing to be an anti-racist organisation. We are coming to talks like this. I've also ran a separate talk as well. And it's not just for publicity. We don't care about publicity. It's because we are actively going out there and holding ourselves accountable. So if someone encounters something within our recruitment process or while working at DfE Digital, someone can actually say, this is what you said, but you're not doing it, and this is how we need to improve. We go out there and we talk about it. We make sure that we are learning. We make sure that if we make mistakes, we learn from that and we implement new things. It's really making public promises and publishing things. So our blog posts have been written by the head of Project Race, our Chief Digital and Technology Officer, Emma Stace, myself, Farah's writing one now. So really being open and honest about this journey that we are on to being an anti-racist organisation. I actually popped this one in here, which is Race Equalities Week, just for those of you who may be thinking, where do I start? A lot of the time within D&I, it's around looking at what are the good starting points and how do you bring this up to your leadership team? And one thing that we do within lots of different spaces within equity and inclusion is look at what different awareness weeks are happening throughout the year. So last week it was actually Race Equalities Week, and that meant there was lots of materials, there was lots of content, there was advertisement, there were things that we could put on our social media and share with our teams, and it just meant that we could really go along with the movement, and it makes it a little bit easier for those people who don't have loads of capacity and don't have a full team of people working on this. So look at what different awareness weeks are happening and make sure that you engage with them. Make those public promises with organisation. Have you signed up to the Race at Work Charter. What have you done to make sure that you're really going along with different organisations? Because there are so many organisations that can really help you to make a difference. As part of Race Equality Week last week, all of our team members actually had a few days to think about what pledge we are going to be making. So we talk about pledges quite a lot because they're basically just open promises, open things that we are committing to as team members, and we can help be held accountable. And last week we had some time to think about, right, how are we going to update our pledge? What are we going to be doing? And then at Friday, we all joined a different meeting. It wasn't a away day, it was just a normal meeting on a Friday. And we came out and we said what our pledge was to ensure that we are helping to eradicate racism within the workplace. The next thing here I want to point out to you is around panel member pledges. So just now we spoke about our training and how it's mandatory for every panel member that works with us to go through that training. So that's one step. The next step is actually to get our panel members to complete a pledge once they have undergone the training. How are they going to help eradicate racism and discrimination? What are they going to do? We then hold those people accountable to their pledges. We keep them as a recruitment team, and we make sure that we hold people accountable, and also ask people if they want to update them. As people grow and as we learn and as we change and develop our mindsets, those pledges are bound to change, and make sure they're always on part of the agenda. And the next one I just wanted to say was delegating resource. We know it's not this easy, but part of our commitment has actually been saying we need people to be working on this full time. I'm sure lots of people on the call can understand and empathise with this when we say it often falls down, the responsibility for inclusion, being anti-racist, for whatever it is, often falls down to people as an add-on to their job. It's not very often you have a completely separate job for people to look at this. So what can your organisation actually do to dedicate resource to being anti-racist, to tackling discrimination, to tackling institutional and structural racism where you are? If it's not being able to dedicate an entire team like Project Race, it might be, what is your diversity inclusion lead able to focus on? So really think about those things so the burden doesn't always fall down on people to an add-on, because that's when things get deprioritised. So these are just some of the things we are doing to hold ourselves accountable. We had to pick a few things in here to talk to you about. We could keep going all day. We're really cautious of your time. So we're now going to move on to Farah.
Thank you. So we've gone through some of the steps to tackle racism, and whilst we must start the journey from somewhere, we, at DfE, we do recognise that we have a long way to go. So my question is, what have you been doing to challenge racism, whether that's in or outside of the workplace? What are the small steps, small changes that you have been doing? Please don't all go at once.
Hi, I don't mind going first.
Thank you.
So the word anti-racist seems to be the new buzzword, which is okay, but only if you mean it. So recently my son's school, which is the local Roman Catholic school, even though we're not people of faith, declared themselves to be anti-racist. So I thought, great, fantastic, that's a step in the right direction, seeing as you weren't bothered when he got racially abused last time. And we were sent through on Teams a picture of God as an old white male floating on a cloud, saying that God's always watching you when you're online. And I challenged this. And I said, this kind of imagery in school is not necessary in this day and age, the depiction of God being a white old male. And I said, and while I'm at it, the nativity scene showing Jesus as blonde-haired and blue-eyed, where children, even at the age of 11, think Jesus was white, is really, really not good in this day and age. So I actually challenged them. I said, if you're anti-racist, then you need to change your imagery within the school to reflect how things really are, and stop going with the old stereotypes. So yeah, call them out. That's what I say.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nicola. That was a really valuable contribution. And it's interesting what you say about imagery, isn't it? So much of what we learn is by what's around us, particularly as children, as young people. We'll just soak in. We're sponges. We'll soak in whatever we see. So imagery, but also language, and having people in authority positions, claim they're anti-racist and then like not do something about it. Yeah, I can really empathise with that and understand how frustrating that might have been. What about some other people? What have you been doing or thinking about doing potentially?
Hiya, Saria again. So after the George Floyd murder last year, a few of us got together and we have also started a racial equality working group. Like you say, it's voluntary work in terms of helping the organisation take that journey of becoming anti-racist. So we've looked at the language that we use, the good old BAME term, needs looking at, and we have just had some really crucial meetings to look at the culture and how we can support each, Black members of staff, well, people of non-European backgrounds, I suppose.
Mm. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's always really interesting to hear how these different working groups are set up. And like you said, people giving their time on top of their workload. So how are these things being prioritised? How are we going to ensure that it's not just something to talk about right now? And I want to pick up on something. I think, Nicola, you had just said it, which is anti-racism, or being anti-racist is the buzzword at the minute. How do we do the work, and how do our leaders do the work to ensure that it's not a buzzword, that it's just in our values of what we do every single day, and it's not something that's going to come and go? You'll notice probably that a lot of places now are starting to move away from the word diversity. So, for example, people may be using the word equity, which is making opportunities more equitable for people. And again, diversity was seen as one of those buzzwords for years, wasn't it, Farah, that people would sort of use and throw about, and now there's something about it that's lost the meaning. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I feel that obviously with what happened last year, it kind of made people want to talk about it and address the situation even more. But it's something that silence is not really an option. And speaking with your colleagues, your Black colleagues, asking them how they are, speaking to them about their experiences if they're comfortable enough, because again, like I said, you can't just sit back and let something like this happen. And this is why we have put these small steps into place. Whilst they're small, they are effective. And again, like I've stressed before, we are on a journey. We are making mistakes, but we have to start off from somewhere. So I think starting off from somewhere is better than doing nothing at all.
Absolutely. You've got a few things in the chat there as well, Farah. So something from Sophie to say, in the before times, when we could go out, the good old days, I'd always organised group meetings in places that weren't just pubs to encourage attendance amongst people who might be uncomfortable around the sale of alcohol. I found a more diverse crowd attended. Absolutely. So you're thinking about that, like, really basic thing of location. Where are you coming? Where are you meeting? Who's going to turn up? We've got some networking going on in the chat. Love that. You've then got the next thing, which is employing and taking advice from those who experience racism and their families help move businesses forward, including all in the process of change. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But actually, I want to bring up something that Farah mentioned. I think at the beginning, the first few slides, which is around not putting the burden on people who are daily going through discrimination. I think absolutely we have to listen, we have to learn. What are people like myself, who I see in a privileged position as a white person, what am I doing? What are my white counterparts doing to make sure that we are also taking that burden off of people, and it's not just that voluntary work put on top of people who are already experiencing discrimination? I think that's really important. We've got lots of things going on for the chat, which is lovely. Did anybody else want to come off mute or to say anything that they're thinking about trying or that they've heard of? No, that's absolutely fine. Well, we really hope that we've given you some food for thought. We had to just pick 3 little things that we were doing. So just to recap, we've spoke about our starting points of getting the data, working with Project Race, holding an away day. And as Farah said, we're now on our 3rd away day that's completely run by people within our directorate. We've solely focused on race. Something to note here is that we've asked our colleagues for every away day, and we are still focusing our away days on the experiences of our Black colleagues, our Black friends, our Black family members. That may change as we go forward, as people say, actually, we could talk about this for the next away day, but we just want to make that bit clear. So we're now on our third away day. We mentioned the panel member training that we're rolling out, so inclusivity oh, sorry, I got that wrong then. Bias and inclusive interview training. It's mandatory for all of our panel members who even want to get involved with us in our recruitment of digital specialists. We hold people account. We make sure they make pledges when they do the training. We then check up on them to make sure they're doing it. We have people like Farah and myself in moderation meetings to make sure that we see bias when it happens and we challenge bias on the spot, but also help those who aren't as comfortable challenge bias as well. And then the last thing we spoke about there was accountability. How are we actually holding ourselves accountable through the race working group, for actually dedicating resource to this, making pledges, making public promises, getting involved in different awareness weeks that are happening, that we've already got that content created for us. So the only thing really left for us to say is a huge thank you to everybody who joined us today, to everybody who's been listening. These are our Twitter handles. You can follow us on Twitter if you want to start a conversation with us. You could also follow us on LinkedIn if you want to have a chat with us. We just want to say a humongous thank you to everybody for your really valuable contribution. Thanks for comparing yourself mainly to bananas. I really appreciate that.